It's fantasy football draft season, which means it's time to prepare and plan for what our drafts might look like this season. I'm John Macri, and for this YouTube exclusive short form episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, I'll be going over my ideal draft strategy in 2025 Superflex drafts this season when picking from the early range of 1, 2, or 3. So, for context, I'll be using Sleeper's ADP as of August 7th. So this is probably going to change if you're watching this closer to the start of the season, beginning of September, whenever your draft ends up having to be. But for the most part, we're going to try to keep it in line with what the ADP is right now and let you guys kind of see what the path is and kind of go from there. But yeah, before we dive in as well, I do want to throw a quick chart up on the screen so that we can kind of get a better idea of which positions make up the majority of top scorers each year, so that we can also kind of help plan for our drafts and what our builds should look like, right? So regardless of whether we're in PPR, half PPR, non-PPR, it's the quarterbacks that dominate the majority of like top 3, top 5, top 10, top 25 fantasy scorers every single year, which is important for Superflex specifically because we don't want to miss out on that super high end upside at the very least, where we can maybe hit on 1 or 2 options that are going to finish inside the top 5 or the top 10 fantasy scores on the year. So just context that I wanted to put out there before we get into things. And then really quickly, I want to let you guys know that the PFF Plus sale for new annual subscribers still going on. Even if you missed out on the early bird special, there's still money to be saved and value to be had. Just head to subscribe.pff.com for more detail. You'll get access to all the player grades, fantasy content, betting tools, all the locked written content, and more. And so now is a great time still to get in on a PFF Plus subscription because it's only on for a limited time. Again, that's subscribe.pff.com to save right now. All right, let's get into the actual draft. We're picking from the 1 to 3 range. So I just occupied the number 2 pick to kind of split the diff, right? And that will allow us to, always within these top 3, we're always going to be able to start with an elite fantasy quarterback right off the bat, right? So I laid it out in the charts just earlier. The quarterback position is what dominates the fantasy scoreboard, especially in leagues that don't score full PPR. So keeping that in mind as well. In super flex leagues, where every team is going to be targeting at least 2 quarterbacks from the small pool of options at the position, they become much more valuable as the position will dry up quickly, right? So locking down your starters right away is going to be the most optimal approach, especially from one of the first 3 draft spots, where your next pick after that is still like another 20 spots away, right? So really important here. I ended up landing on Lamar Jackson. I have Lamar as QB1. If you have Josh Allen QB1, I really don't think you can go wrong with either of those two. Even Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, whichever one of those guys you prefer. I think they're all elite fantasy quarterbacks, obviously, and all of them are capable of finishing top 1 at the position, right? So just based on how the ADP typically goes in this range, we're going to try to grab an elite quarterback right off the bat. Lamar, obviously, rushing upside. We saw the passing upside last year, 41 passing touchdowns. That was a career high. Even if that number comes down, like, he has the legs to make it work and make up for any kind of down decrease in the passing game. So Lamar Jackson, 100%, he's going to be an option for us here within the first 3 picks, and one that I'd be very happy with for Superflex for sure. Going on to round 2, which doesn't come until round picks 22 to 24 in the draft. What I'd like to do here, just based on how ADP is shaken out, I like to grab a top skill position player. So the top 6 quarterbacks are typically off the board by this range. So really we're looking at guys like Bo Nix, Baker Mayfield as kind of the next options, which it's fine, but there, I think, are similar options at the position available later on. While running back, wide receiver, for example, I think they offer a really enticing proposition of potential position leading players. And for me, I circled Nico Collins here as the pick. So Nico Collins last year, obviously outside of missing time due to injury, he checked every box that he can control as far as being a wide receiver 1, both for NFL purposes and for fantasy, right? So even with missed time, like, I think this guy has now delivered back-to-back seasons of elite play at the wide receiver position, he should have no problem acting as our wide receiver one, our top skill position player. Again, as long as he can stay healthy. But that's a concern with every player, right? Injuries happen all the time in the NFL. We can't really predict them. Nico Collins, as good a bet of any in this range to be our wide receiver one this season. You could also look at Devin Achane, Drake London in this range if you like. But for me personally, I really like Nico Collins this year. Round 3 is, again, I'm not going quarterback yet. I'm adding one more starter at least, right, from the non-quarterback pool. I don't think the value is quite right on quarterback just yet based on the ADP. So just kind of soaking up the potential at the skill position still makes the most sense for me in the third round before kind of turning our attention back to maybe quarterback in round 4 or 5, however it might fall. But for me, Bucky Irving's in this range. I love Bucky Irving. I think he is another guy that if we're going to get him, he's going to potentially be a top 5 push for top 1 quarterback or running back if all things go well, right? But at the very least, I think he has top 5 potential. We saw, him last year from week 10 on when his opportunities really improved. He was dominant, 703 rushing yards, 218 receiving yards. That was 7th in the entire league at his position. He was the PPR RB7 over that span. There's a chance that he can get more work this year just by the way they're talking him up and just how good he looked last year as well. So Bucky Irving, absolutely in play for me as my RB1. So now we kind of have our QB1, our wide receiver 1, and our RB1, all of whom I think are great bets to finish top 5 at the position, at the very least. Obviously, anything bad can happen, but that's the case, again, with all players. And based on how things shook out with our ADP, I tend to be very happy with this start. But look, not everybody's going to agree with these exact players. I'm just here to kind of provide an idea of what this specific build will look like, and then you guys can adjust from there. But with QB1, wide receiver 1, and RB1 in tow, we could kind of turn our attention to QB2, because now I think the value finally adds up nicely here to grab our second quarterback. And there should be several options to choose from depending on what you're looking for. Kyler Murray is a personal favorite for me in this range because he has decent rushing upside. He also has 2 top end receiving options to get the ball to. We saw him have his best passing season last year since 2021. He finished among the top 12 quarterbacks in passing grade. He averaged also more fantasy points per game with his rushing ability last season than any other quarterback that's going in this kind of range here. So we're kind of aiming for that upside, other than Justin Fields, who's going a little bit later on Sleeper. But I think for the quarterbacks that he's comparable to in this ADP range, he at least has the best rushing upside of the bunch. So I still really like Kyler Murray as our QB2 target for this season, if with this kind of build. You also have Caleb Williams, Drake May, Brock Purdy. Those are kind of the other options. So if you prefer one of those guys, you can absolutely go that route as well. Going into round 5. So this I do like to target another running back here. This is going to be our RB2 because the position, it does dry up relatively quickly, especially compared to wide receiver. And like you'd be able to see, in those charts that I showed before, they also are the ones that give us the best chance for that top 3, top 5, top 10 up overall upside that we should always kind of be looking for in these early rounds. So after spending our round 2 or round 3, whatever it ends up working to be, pick on our RB1, coming back in the 5th round to get another strong option for RB2, I think puts us in a good spot for our starting lineups. There are at least a couple capable players of delivering an RB1 season in 2025 in this range. For me, you got Alvin Kamara, but I really like Kenneth Walker. I think Walker's role last year, I understand that there's the injury concern, but everything that we saw from him last year, he had his best season in 2024 as a runner with a workload to be a fantasy RB1 if he stays healthy for an entire season. So yeah, it's a little bit of a risk, but it's a risk that's baked into his price and one that I think we can take advantage of. Receiving, it's never really been a big part of Walker's game during his first few seasons, but he took on that role last year. He saw career high in total targets. It was huge. He dominated the 2-minute drill for Seattle as well. even ahead of Zach Charbonnet, who was previously playing that role. Now he's going to kind of continue to dominate, I think, that role in Clint Kubiak's offense in 2025 for the Seattle Seahawks. So really like Kenneth Walker as a potential RB2 here with RB1 upside. Once we get into round 6, it's a little tight, but we're hoping for a tight end here, right? Because of how the ADP shakes out, I think our best shot to kind of grab a top 5 tight end comes from hoping TJ Hawkinson is still available in this 6th round. It isn't the worst thing if he's gone. We could maybe take like a Justin Fields as our QB3, right? And maybe take a couple swings on like some of the, I would call them like dark horse tight end 1 candidates later on. And we can talk about who those guys are in another video, but I also put out an article covering them as well. But I think we eliminate any risk for that, for waiting on the tight ends any longer than this by grabbing Hawkinson in this range while he's still available. So obviously had the late season ACL tear in 2023, didn't quite look right in 2024. It's obviously going to take him time to get back up to speed, but now a full off season here in Kevin O'Connell's offense, even with an inexperienced quarterback like JJ McCarthy, Hawkinson is a top target in that offense. He has been a top 2 target every year that he's been in Minnesota, and I don't think that's going to change this season. Jordan Addison's got a suspension as well, so Hawkinson is a great bet here to be our locked-in weekly tight end 1, and I think still gives us the tight end 1 upside overall if things go well. So now to kind of recap, like through our 6 rounds, this is really kind of the overall build that I'm looking for by this point in the draft when we're picking from those top 3 spots. So elite QB1, obviously, with the first pick, 2 high-end running backs, wide receiver 1, and a top 5 tight end for our tight end 1. And then, like I said, another high-end quarterback starter, so that we're set with 2 locked-in starters every week at the quarterback position. After that, things can kind of go however you like, and this might be where we're all going to start to vary a lot more. But for me, I still like to grab QB3 relatively early in Superflex, depending on who is available here. You may find that the quarterback options are still strong enough that you'd like to add some insurance at the position, while at the same time not allowing your league mates to take advantage of any value still hanging around. Like there's a chance that Justin Fields goes a little bit before this range. Otherwise, he'd be the top option here, but there are still a couple quarterbacks worth considering with starting potential. I'm thinking about Trevor Lawrence or JJ McCarthy. And for me, we just took TJ Hawkinson. I'm going to try to pair him up with JJ McCarthy just in case here, because McCarthy in Kevin O'Connell's offense, this could be huge for passing potential, right? He's throwing to Justin Jefferson. He's throwing to a fully healthy TJ Hawkinson. And once Addison's suspension is up after 3 games, he's back as well. Hopefully we won't need McCarthy within the first 3 weeks because we have Lamar and Kyler Murray. So bye weeks wouldn't start up until beyond that anyways. But yeah, I mean, look, we saw what Sam Darnold did in this offense last year. He finished as the overall QB7, averaging 20 fantasy points per game. Sam Darnold never looked like a fantasy starter. All of a sudden, he goes into that offense with those passing options, and he becomes one. JJ McCarthy has just as good a shot as any to also return similar value here. So willing to take the shot on him for our QB3 depth to fill in when our other starters miss time or are on bye weeks, whatever it happens to be, and then stopping anybody else from unlocking that upside as well. So once we get into round 8, we're going to go back to wide receiver, because having taken advantage of some of the values at quarterback, running back, and tight end, naturally that's going to leave our wide receiver position in need of some support, right? Nico Collins potentially already locked into our number 1 spot. We'll have to find more startable options to kind of round out the rest of the starting lineup. So luckily, with wide receiver being the deepest position of our 4, we're not in a bad spot to fill those holes. I circled Calvin Ridley here. He's the top target in Tennessee. It's not particularly close when you got, Tyler Lockett, Van Jefferson, a couple rookies. So Ridley, look, he cleared 100 targets last year. I think it was 113. Should have no problem doing so again, this time with a potential upgrade at quarterback, the number 1 overall pick, Cam Ward. I like the potential here. I know, look, it's not the sexy pick, but based on how we spent our other picks, Calvin Ridley can definitely be a starter for us and keep the position afloat while we try to hit on the upside of some of those other players. And then what we're going to do for me at least, we're going to try to keep hitting at wide receiver, try to make up some ground there with some high upside swings. And there are some risk reward options to consider once we get, I guess, closer to getting out of the top 100 picks and beyond. And there are bound to be, some breakouts and values that greatly outperform their ADP in this range. And the one that I'm looking at is Ricky Pearsall right now. He is one of the players, I think, with a shot to significantly outperform his current evaluation if he emerges with a consistent starting role in the 49ers offense, right? Brandon Ayuk coming off injury. Deebo Samuel off to Washington. Juwan Jennings out for the rest of training camp and the preseason with an injury / contract dispute. So Pearsall really has a nice chance to establish himself in year 2. They obviously spent a first round pick on him. He's only just been activated off the PUP list, so it might take him a few weeks to get up to speed, but that should still be before the season and build a connection with Brock Purdy. So I'll take a swing here on Ricky Pearsall as our wide receiver 3, but we're not going to stop there, right? We're going to make sure that our wide receiver position is in a really good spot, because based on this draft position, how things have gone so far and how they're looking with this ADP, we'll have opportunities, I think, to make up ground at wide receiver after only drafting 1 through the first, 7 rounds. So again, we're in a spot now to target the values of like former wide receiver 1 options like Cooper Kupp, Brandon Ayuk, Stephon Diggs in this range, making those kind of the best options over some of like the backup running backs right now. So I put Cooper Kupp here. He's obviously, he's going to act as probably the wide receiver 2 in Seattle. He'll have some wide receiver 1 weeks in there as well, where he's the top target. But, he's another guy that's dealt with injury. But when he's healthy, he is one of the top target earners at the position. That included last year, 27.1% target rate when he was on the field. Obviously, Sam Darnold in the Seattle offense is undeniably different from Matthew Stafford in the Sean McVay offense, but Kupp at least only faces one real threat for target competition, which is Jackson Smith and Jigba. So should be in line for some significant volume there. So yeah, a healthy Cooper Kupp, much better than his wide receiver 40 plus ADP. So if we're looking to make up ground at the position, he's kind of the perfect target to help us do so. And we're still not going to stop there, because we're going to add one more piece of insurance at wide receiver, right? We've neglected the position early on. That was always going to lead to more kicks at the can in the later rounds. It just so happens that our best targets to do so come from rounds like 8 to 11. So for those not totally comfortable at like tight end here, there are some solid options to consider in this range. But since we're only ever going to start 1 per week, we'll make sure to maybe target a deeper position that we need more from, which is wide receiver. And we have TJ Hawkinson at tight end, so it's not a must. It's not a complete need there. So I put Stephon Diggs. Look, he isn't obviously what he used to be in Buffalo and Minnesota before that. He's coming off injury himself, but he's another guy, kind of like Calvin Ridley, where he's set to act as the clear wide receiver 1 in his offense and for Drake May in 2025, and getting him as our wide receiver 5, I think, is an ideal value for somebody like Stephon Diggs. So I'm pretty happy with that. Once we get our wide receivers locked up here, we got some options to play with based on matchup and how they're performing. I end up going to add some depth at running back. And this is something that I also like to do even later in drafts, where I'm taking shots on some of the rookies and stuff like that. But the beginning of like depth options at the running back position starts here really, but can certainly continue well beyond this range. And like those rookie running backs, like, whether it's a Byshul Tootin or Dylan Sampson, DJ Giddens, Taj Brooks, all of those guys kind of going a little bit later than this. They're definitely in play in the later rounds as well. So I went Tajay Spears. He's obviously not somebody that's likely to lead the Titans backfield, barring a Tony Pollard injury, but on the chance that Pollard does miss any time, there's obviously great potential here for a high volume workload that would easily return starting value in our fantasy lineups. And even with Pollard in the lineup, there's enough of a role for Spears, like on passing downs, to serve as a flex option or a 1 week fill in or something like that on bye weeks until we hit bigger at the position with some of our later picks as well. Other than that, I mean, we'll go through one more pick here, and really that's just finding a backup tight end. I'm trying to target untapped potential for upside, really, and whether that is at wide receiver, running back, or tight end. Personally, I went with tight end here and Isaiah Likely. I think Marvin Mims, J.K. Dobbins definitely in play as well. But if you listen to the breakout episode, you know that I like Isaiah Likely's opportunity this year. He's grown his role even with Mark Andrews in the offense. I know he's dealing with the injury right now. All signs kind of point to him being back for week 1. So Isaiah Likely would definitely be in play here for my tight end 2, which I probably wouldn't need to use unless of emergency there with TJ Hawkinson or on a bye week. So that's really what we're looking for. But at least we have some maybe high upside potential in somebody like an Isaiah Likely, who we don't need to start every week. But if things work out, he could be a locked in starter for us, and we could find ways to get him in the lineup in a flex spot or something like that. Other than that, I mean, once we're out of this pick range, like this is 145 to 147 in drafts. Really, once you get outside like the top 125, I'm fine not, bending to the will of the ADP, right? And going and grabbing your guys. You don't have to follow the ADP as tightly here. If you believe in certain sleepers or rookies that, are going later at this point in the drafts, and you see their ADP is a couple rounds later, it's not going to kill you if you're a believer in them and reaching on them a little bit to make sure that you get your guy and that you don't miss out on that upside that you believe in. So that's what these later rounds are all about here, just filling out the rest of your lineup with some of those high upside players. Other than that, that's it. Quick one. Thank you all for tuning in. We did, this exercise last year. It was a lot of fun. Some good discussions around people's strategies. So feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section or any questions, whatever the case may be. I'm happy to talk as long as we're respectful to each other, obviously. If you're looking for other draft pick ranges, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, I've written them all up on pff.com, and 10 to 12 comes out on Friday. It's actually a really fun one for me as well, because ADP doesn't really give us the great quarterback option there in Superflex, so makes for an exciting and different approach. So give that one a check that one out if you like. But yeah, we'll have more of these short form YouTube exclusive videos coming out throughout the rest of the off season. So hopefully you tune in for those. Please don't forget to like and subscribe while you're here. And until next time, peace out.